So again, power to X is a very large subject, and I'm going to try to focus on the transport sector, and most importantly, the transport sector in 2050, because as I said before, getting our emissions down to zero in 2050 is going to be very difficult if we don't have power to X. And I'm going to talk about why it's necessary. So when it comes to these mathematical models, we focus on the competition. So if we're going to be looking at how power to X can be integrated into an energy system, we also need to know what is the competition for power to X. And so there's the fossil fuels. However, they emit CO2 emissions, so that's not very viable for 2050. However, we have biofuels, and biofuels can be a very good source of a CO2 free or a small CO2 footprint that can compete with power to X technologies. And biofuels have been along for much longer than these power to X fuels. So just a quick example to kind of wrap our minds around how power to X and how the transport demands are going to affect the entire energy system. So in 2050, we predict that Denmark will need about 47 petajoules of aviation fuel. Now, where does this aviation fuel come from is the question. If we use the biofuel pathway, we would need 83 petajoules of biomass. And Denmark has about 94 petajoules of straw and wood that it can use every year. So 83 petajoules is almost the entire amount of biomass that Denmark has available at the moment, just to use to create aviation fuels for Denmark. If we do the electrofuel pathway, so we're combining carbon dioxide, which is captured either from direct air capture or from a point source such as Aalborg, Portland, we would need 2.5 megatons of CO2, and then we would also need 19 terawatt hours of electricity. And in 2018, Denmark only produced 15 terawatt hours of electricity from wind in 2018. So this would require a very, very large amount of extra electricity capacity to be installed just for the aviation sector in Denmark. So this kind of gives you a very large perspective of how much energy would be required to reduce these emissions to zero. If we do this third pathway, which we call the e-biofuel pathway, so it's similar, it's kind of a mix between the two. So instead of getting our CO2 source from a point source or from direct air capture, we're getting it from biomass as well. So this is where the CO2 is coming from, but then we're also using the electricity. So we're kind of creating a synthesis between the biofuel and the electrofuel pathway. And so we would need 42 petajoules of biomass, which is still a very considerable amount, but it's much less than the 83. And we would still need 10 terawatt hours of electricity. And this is still a very, very significant amount. And this is just for the aviation sector. And just to clarify things, this is including international transport. So this is the amount of fuel that is needed at Danish airports. So it's not necessarily within Denmark, it's the amount of fuel that is demanded in Denmark. And so as you can see, any of these pathways is going to be a very, very big struggle to get to 2050, and large changes to the energy system, and especially the electricity system in Denmark, is going to be necessary to create these fuels. And so what type of fuels am I talking about? So maybe just to clarify things, we have transport fuels, and then we have our fossil fuels. And since we're talking about 2050, which is supposed to be this emission zero target, we have biofuels and we have electrofuels. And then in the middle, we have these kind of e-biofuels. And so these can be in the form of jet fuels, which are kerosene, or gasoline, or methanol for road transport. And they can also be for shipping purposes as well. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the fuels, but what about the CO2? And so CO2 in our models, we kind of distinguish between point sources. So CO2 that is coming from a particular geographic location. So it's coming from a chimney or a industry kind of park. So the location is defined currently or will be defined in the future. And these are what we call point sources. And then we also have direct air capture. And so these are technologies that used very large fans to just capture the carbon dioxide out of the air. And so the location of these direct air capture facilities can be optimized to so they can be put anywhere as long as there's a stable electricity grid. And so in 2050, what we're seeing our energy system results, especially when we come to the electricity sector, we see a very large penetration of wind, as you might have expected, both onshore as well as offshore, and some solar PV. And then we have some CHP plants, so some combined heat and power plants, which are mostly waste incineration plants. And so this is the Danish electricity grid, and then this is the electricity grid of the Nordics, so we're including Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany. And so this is the electricity mix of the entire region that we're looking at in this analysis. And then when it comes to district heating, we see also a large use of heat pumps, which we can consider a power-to-X technology, as we're taking electricity and using it to create heat, as well as a lot of CHP facilities, which are also using waste incineration. And then we see up here, we see this large amount of excess heat. And so this excess heat is coming from 3 different sources: industry, fuel production.
Interrupt, Mason. I'm not sure that we can see your screen correctly now.
Okay. You can't see my screen?
Yes, we see the figure with the Danish map, and then on the left side with the district heating network and electricity grid. I don't know.
Yes, I think that's very local for your PC. I see the actual presentation now.
Now I got the next pictures. Thank you.
Okay.
It was also okay in my end. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, super. Yeah, just let me know if something is wrong. But yeah, to get back to this, so we have excess heat from 3 different sources: industry, fuel production, as well as data centers. And I'll talk a bit more about excess heat later, but we see excess heat as a very large source of energy for the district heating network in Denmark, as well as a way to alleviate the costs of power-to-X in the future. So if you're able to provide excess heat to the district heating network and get a small amount of revenue for this, it can bring down the costs of the fuel production when you're making fuels for transport or for industry. And on the right-hand side, you can see the map of Denmark, and you can see where the model is choosing to produce these fuels. And the model chooses to produce the fuels based on 2 criteria. One, where the demand is, but also where there's a suitable district heating grid that can take on the excess heat that is going to be created during the fuel production process. So this allows the power-to-X technology to use the excess heat and give it to the district heating system to alleviate some of the costs. And this is why you see the fuel production occurring in areas of Denmark with a bit higher population. So when it comes to the results and what types of fuels we're seeing produced, we're seeing a very large share of biofuels being produced, mostly because these are mature technologies. And we are using technology forecasts primarily given to us by the Energistyrelsen, but we also use forecasts for different costs and efficiencies from other sources internationally. And so when you look in the base results, you see a very high share of biofuels, as well as a decent share of e-biofuels. And so these are coming in the form of methanol, as well as these aviation fuels for the transport sector. When we when we do these, we want to kind of see different scenarios and what would happen if we change different parameters within our models, because this is sometimes more important than looking at the base results, because we're looking at 2050. So there are very large assumptions within the model, and many different forecasts, whether it be electricity prices or fuel prices or commodity prices or demands. So we look at different parameters and see what would happen if we change a few things. So for example, this more EV scenario, as you can see next to it in the middle, we're assuming that a much higher share of electric vehicles are integrated into the Danish energy system. And so this is in the form of electric trucks and more electric big construction vehicles and larger vehicles that we think could be electrified in the future. However, maybe at the moment, the forecast is saying maybe not. And so as you can see, the types of fuels that are produced don't change, but we see a much smaller need for fuel production. And then this results in less biomass needing to be imported. And as some of you may know, there is a very high amount of biomass that is being imported at the moment, mostly wood pellets, and this is being used for CHP plants. However, we see the import of wood could also be something that is necessary to create these fuels. However, there's also a very big debate going on whether importing biomass is a sustainable process. This can depend on the source of biomass, whether it's coming from a particular country, as well as the type of biomass and how it's imported and how far it has to travel. And all of these different parameters can kind of bring a debate on whether biomass is a sustainable fuel in the future. But as you can see, we're using a lot of e-biofuels. So basically, we're taking the electricity from Denmark and combining it with the local biomass, the straw and the wood, to create these e-biofuels. However, then we also have to make some electrofuels, basically because we don't have enough biomass without it. And so you can kind of see this order merit curve. You can kind of see this cost curve by looking at this graph. And you can see that the biofuels are the cheapest as they come in first. And then we have these e-biofuels coming in. And then these electrofuels, these power-to-X fuels, are only coming in when they have to. So only when we restrict the amount of biomass do these power-to-X technologies come in. Again, however, this very much depends on forecasts, both on the electrolyzer side, but also on the fuel synthesis side. And just to clarify what I was talking about with the excess heat, as you can see here, we're seeing about 12 terawatt hours of excess heat for district heating, which equates to about 20% of the district heating demand, and which is a very significant amount of energy. And so these energy models that we're using here, we can calibrate them to different kind of geographical restrictions and geographical qualities. So as you can see, in this particular analysis, we're optimizing the location of these fuel technologies based on different regions within Denmark. Yeah, I believe it's 96 different regions. So what are the main outcomes and kind of conclusions to this? The electrolyzer costs, efficiencies, forecasts are very, very important and can highly affect your results when you're looking at how these different power-to-X technologies will financially work and financially be successful in the future. The wind cost and the electricity costs have been going down very fast, and many people are predicting that the electrolyzer costs will also be reducing this fast in the future. However, we're still at a very high cost when it comes to the electrolyzers. The biomass potentials in 2050 will not be sufficient in creating this fossil fuel independent energy system in Denmark. And so either the import of biomass needs to be analyzed more, or we need to make more power to X technologies and make this more of a viable solution. And then fuels that are utilizing both hydrogen and biomass, so these e-biofuels, we're finding as the most economical, feasible, and they use the limited domestic biomass, as well as they use the domestic energy electricity source, the wind power in Denmark. And so we think that this, along with power to heat, can kind of create a more independent energy system in Denmark, where Denmark relies less on neighboring countries to import fuels, import natural gas, and import other commodities. And power to X can kind of create a energy system in Denmark that is more Danish focused, and also can provide other countries as a model to see how power to X can kind of transform an energy system and kind of create supplementary benefits.